Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inner Loop YouTube channel. I'm Lena, the manager of our Authors Corner series and program. Today, I'll be having a conversation with Dominic McDonald about his collection of poetry, I'd Rather Be Called a Nerd. For more Dominic and more Authors Corner, you can check out our website to find articles, interviews, podcast episodes, and most importantly, a link to purchase the book. Welcome, Dominic. So great to have you.
So great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. So I want to start off talking about something that you mentioned in the preface of this book, which is that the book is a continuation of a poem called Monster in your first collection, which I believe was self-published, right?
Correct.
Right. So could you tell a little bit more about that poem and how this book grew out of it?
So Monster is a poem in which I relate myself to a lot of the quote unquote monsters that were in literature. So there's Frankenstein, there's zombies, and there's a mummy. Because I feel that the Black American experience is to be a monster, right? And not just something that people are afraid of because they don't understand, but also in a sense, much like the Frankenstein, which was the one I related to the most, like it's a person that we piece together from what we think a person should be, right? So just living in those expectations that don't really exemplify the human experience because it's really just trying to portray or have the best version or the best representative of a Black American male, which I feel is been a part of my experience. So that leads into I'd rather be called a nerd because now it's the full holistic perspective of what is to have those expectations, what is it to sit in those expectations, and what is it to resist those expectations as well.
So this is, I think, a perfect segue into the title poem of I'd Rather Be Called a Nerd. And I thought it would be fun for us to be able to hear you perform it for us, since I know that you have a background in spoken word. So if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to hear it.
Okay, sure. I'd rather be called a nerd than a nigga. No matter how many times you say the word has evolved, I've evolved myself from words, so say I'm nothing. Like a ghost, because many times I've been through it. The only thing that keeps my body alive is fluid, so take it and abuse it until you become addicted to this flow. Don't stand up because I be feeling so low with no insurance to cover the crash in the male egos and vain women. Remain timid with thoughts that ride on streets with the same limits, like I never finished college. Since the streets respect full wallets, never mind if our mind is empty, we gotta work like machines. But see, I'm a human being. Stay up late because I daydream. That's why sometimes when you see me, I tend to look lost because I be so awake that my soulful tastes different realms. Plus, my mind is overwhelmed, wondering when would a hurt stop. Because people will promise you the world, but only give you a dirt rock. That's why I pray to my creator, whether it's Father God or Mother Nature. Live next to a church where Jesus was my neighbor, and so is Jesus. This is my truth that I won't sell out like ice cream trucks in suits or nice clean tucks like I never wore shirts that said for us by us. Now I don't sag to interviews, nor wear slacks to chill with crew. See, views on youth be misconstrued for being individuals. My grandfather, rest his soul, always told me whatever's clever pulls a lever. Subconsciously through him, I learned to put words together. Worked at Smart and Final where they acted dumb forever. And that didn't pay the bills nor the meals, so I was never satisfied because my body is highly metabolized. I searched for a better life and I tried, but it seems I need to quadruple because my harvest ain't fruitful. I'm just another short paycheck away from acting rude to the point where I'd be like, yo, don't even talk to me unless you got answers to my problems. And it's only through a divine grace that I keep my mind straight. But somehow I keep a smile on, check the clothes, keep some style on, and if you need me, my number you can always dial on. It's like to know me is a gift in itself. Those who can call me friends have infinite wealth. I be jumping over holes. Many people have failed, realizing that this is only a process as a chip from Intel. And if I have it, I'll spend my last five to chip in to help. So when I die, they say, life, yo, he lived it well. See, niggas in jail, niggas on the block. And this is why niggas hot. They hot because they lie, spend cash to be fly, do anything as long as they can get by. But that's not on my mind, or does it define what I can and will be. So you can call yourself a nigga. That's none of my concern. But based on Webster's second definition, I am someone who slavishly strives to achieve, so I call myself a nerd. That's that poem.
Woo! Thank you so much for that wonderful reading. It's like fascinating to hear about the sort of, I guess, lines of thought and inquiry that were going through your head before devoting maybe more of like a concerted kind of piecing together effort to create this book. Because when I read this poem, I definitely felt like this was sort of like a holistic life philosophy in a poem, and it sets such a wonderful intention for the rest of the book. And I'd love to know a little bit more about the process behind this poem specifically. Did it come out all at once? Was this, you mentioned at our author panel earlier this week that you're often writing a little bit on your commutes and taking notes in your iPhone notes, or, jotting things down. I'm curious, did this come all out in one rush, or was it sort of almost a Frankensteining of different thoughts and, memories and things like that?
Right. So I actually wrote this poem for a pageant. It was a scholarship pageant that I won back in 2007 when I was attending Cal State Long Beach. And shout out to Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, Gamma Kappa chapter for holding space for that. So as a part of the talent, I was doing spoken word because I started doing poetry in 2005. I was on the poetry slam team. And I think I was prompted to write this when people would often question to ask, why do I call myself nerd, right? And it was making that distinction. Well, nerd is not to me, isn't as offensive than calling yourself a nigga, and I kind of wanted to show like the duality of that, you know what I'm saying? And really just showing like where I stand. Like, I'd rather be called this than something that has these negative connotations and the negative connotations of it and everything. So
Yeah, that leads me into my next question, which is about spoken word. I'm really curious about how you go about translating something that is written to be performed into something that is written to be read on the page. So did it stay pretty much the same from the first iteration of this poem when it made its way into the book? And how do you generally think about your work in spoken word and your work in poetry that's read on the page? Is there a difference for you or not so much?
right. So there's a difference. And I want to say that not only am I a student of hip hop, which, where spoken word poetry kind of derived from, but I'm also, I would like to say, a child of hip hop, right? So I remember getting albums and they used to put the lyrics to the songs in the booklets, right? And so I just recall like reading it, and then I also thought, well, this is something that I want to be received, so let me write it in which a way that it's still, I guess, um gives integrity to the English language, because I do have a degree in English. And I was just like, I don't want to, butcher this with a bunch of jargon. So some things I was strategic on putting the ing instead of in, or saying, cause CAUSE versus like CUZ or different things like that, because I want this to be able to be picked up and someone be like, I can read this verse. Well, why does it look like that? I've never seen this before. You know what I'm saying? Because things can get lost in translation with, slang, ebonics, and different things like that. And I wanted to be inviting, versus like, this is just something that you're not going to be able to understand. So that's certain things I was strategic about when you look at the book, and then when you say them out loud and read them with your internal voice, it'll be able to be consistent. And that was another thing that I wanted to make sure I did as well.
That's really fascinating. And that kind of speaks to another, I think, integral aspect of the collection, which is the more sort of memoiristic component. I remember you mentioned earlier this week that it does sort of have a memoiristic bent, that it's like a life in verse in certain ways. And you and I are actually both from California. I grew up in Oakland, and
Okay.
my mom's side is from Los Angeles. So I know you kind of
Shout out to the
moved
town.
around a lot. But yeah, so I feel like it's definitely cool to see a landscape that I'm familiar with rendered so vividly on the page. And you do this like really amazing sort of listing off of these different neighborhoods in LA and even like cities within Los Angeles, because it's so big.
Mhm.
And the speaker of this one poem that I absolutely loved, LAX, LAX land, I don't know how you prefer to pronounce it, but the speaker of that poem has quite a complicated relationship with Los Angeles. And I was curious to hear a little bit more about that. And how does where you grew up make its way into your work?
Right. So it's La La Land, but it's spelled LAX. So it has like that little, double meaning play on words. It shows the juxtaposition of being from, a land of opportunity, and also questioning the opportunities, and kind of doing self-awareness as growing up, in these different areas. And there's a line that I said, who would leave this place of who would leave this paradise of money parasites and druggies, right? So on the outside looking in, people would think this is the best place to be, but being from the inside, like, this is actually the day to day and how people live, and it's not so picturesque, it's not so like camera and documentary worthy. So I wanted to show that as well, and have that be the backdrop of the book, along with personal issues, coming of age, and some identity things there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, just kind of a little biographical tangent. When did you leave Los Angeles?
I left Los Angeles in 2019, um, bef- before I turned 31. So I was already, 30 years old, and mentally I left Los Angeles in maybe 2017. you know, um, because I would just like, I feel so stuck here. I feel like even though there is a name, there is a bit of notoriety, financially, and the assets aren't there. And that's what I want to have, so I can have something to provide for, my family, and whoever else I decide to be a part of that. So I was like, there has to be another place where I can have some more opportunities, and have a better sense of self and a better connection with the community.
It's fascinating too, because as you say, LA is, quote unquote, the land of opportunity. But when everyone around you is striving and wanting to be seen, it's so easy to feel anonymous.
Mm.
And there's just, I mean, just the amount of people, right?
Right, right.
Uh, yeah, but I loved, this is just kind of like a craft tangent as well. There's this one stanza towards the end of that poem where you just, as I mentioned, kind of you just list a bunch of the names of the
Mhm.
neighborhoods. And to me, that like touched my heart a little bit, because I was like, yeah, this abundance, this sense of like this glut of people and places and stimuli all the time. Um, I felt like the speaker in this book was really wrestling with their desire for self-determination, and their environment basically telling them, it's not going to work out for you.
Yeah,
And then reasserting their self-determination anyway.
right. Right. And that is that's something that I didn't realize was a part of the book, but it's consistent because it's a part of my journey, you know. And I want to say LA isn't a place that it says that, it's not going to work. What it's really going to say is you don't matter unless you can convince us why, and who is the us. You know what I'm saying? Like, who am I convincing my worth to here?
Precisely. Definitely. Yeah. So thinking more about the tone of many of these poems, and there's quite a diverse tonality throughout the collection. Um, the ones that stuck out to me, or that I guess made me curious to ask this question, have kind of a, I don't want to say a forceful rhythm, but there's like a real kind of dynamism to the rhythms when you're reading it, and then, kind of like reading it aloud to myself. And especially the ones that are about injustice and struggle, that
Yeah.
there's, I don't want to say that there's like an anger underpinning them, but there's definitely a sense of sort of like bereavement, or like there's the speaker's like aggrieved and maybe a little bit kind of like irked in a almost dry way,
Yeah.
um, which I found myself really connecting with. And so I loved that the sense of anger doesn't distance the reader. In fact, it like invites us in. And I'm curious about your relationship with anger and writing. Do you write from a place of anger when you're tackling subjects like this? And if not, where is that emotional wellspring?
Right. Right. So I was asked a question on the other podcast interview, and it talked about who would be your superhero representation of your book, right? And I thought of the Incredible Hulk, and there's a scene in the first Avengers movie um, where Bruce Banner is the doctor, but has to turn into the Hulk, and Captain America's like, "Now's a good time to be angry," and he says, "Well, that's my secret. I'm always angry." And I think that's the Black American experience from my specific standpoint. There's always something for me to be angry about when it comes to injustice, when it comes to inequalities, and you know different scarcities. But how do I turn that into something that invites people to understand, so that a change can happen, or that will invite people to become an ally? I listen to a lot of hip hop. I think hip hop is very angry because it's like, okay, you are acting like you don't see us, but we're right here. We're in the streets and we're visible. A lot of spoken word poetry, revolutionary spoken word poetry, did the same as well. So I kind of followed behind that as like my compass and my guide on how to write these pieces. So to fully answer your question, my relationship with anger is to turn it into poetry, and that is one of the I would say that's one of the greatest benefits to me, just in my life. But it is a good benefit of poetry that you can take different emotions and turn them into art.
Definitely. Do you see the speaker of these poems as either a facet of you, the writer, or, as you mentioned, kind of a projection into this new creature, this incredible Hulk? Yeah, what is your relationship with kind of crafting a self on the page?
I think as a writer, it is really me coming into Dominic, right? Like that's who I am. I'm the writer, because maybe I'm not allowed to do that in different mediums, in different ways in my actual life, right? So as the speaker in these different pieces, I'm giving a projection of myself that I couldn't say this at the moment because it would come with certain consequences that I just am not able to deal with. So I'm going to, put them down here, and then they'll be released. And, people, they could either relate to it, they cannot relate to it, they skip over, they can get more engaged. I just kind of leave it there, so then that way I can focus on doing something else.
That makes a lot of sense to me. That it's, I don't know if catharsis is the right word. Does that resonate with you? This idea of sort of like, I don't know, like getting something out that needs an outlet.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I would say it is.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite poem in the collection? This is just a question that I just thought of because I'm curious. There are so many that stuck out to me, but I'm curious if you have a poem that either meant a lot to you while you were in the process of kind of like getting it out, or if there's one that has grown in importance for you since the publication of the book or since something changing in your life.
So at first it was Tricks, because Tricks was the most updated. The poetry in the book is over a span of 7 years. So what happened was I won the opportunity to create this book, which we'll be talking about through a contest called DC Poetry Project, right? And they said if you have a manuscript, we'll publish it. That was actually one of the requirements. And I wanted to put this book out, I want to say maybe before I even moved to DC, probably like 2017, because people had saw the first book and they're like, all right, what's next? What's next? And I was just like, I don't know. Let me get to writing, you know what I'm saying? And so a lot of these are like moments in time. But then as we were finalizing the book, I'm like, okay, this needs to have this in here, this needs to have that, just to kind of break the monotony of the tone and different things. So Tricks was one of the newer ones that I wrote, and I think I ended up writing that in 2020 in the pandemic. But my favorite one is Left Home for the Circus, because so much of me is in that poem, and it's like it's monumental, because the poem talks about how I will have to leave home to take public transportation to go to school, and I don't know if I was going to make it back between that journey, and I had to do this every day just because of the dangers of the inner city and different things like that. And so it said, well, I was one of the lucky ones, but there are many, young Black males in Los Angeles who make that same trip and they don't always come back. And I was like, that was one I was like, wow, this is even too deep for me. Like, it gets hard for me to listen to sometimes. But yeah, that's my favorite one of the book.
Yeah, that's amazing. So this is, I think, a nice position to zoom out a little bit and think about the collection as a whole. So we've heard about a couple individual poems, and the first poem in the book is the title poem. I'm curious about how you decided to order these poems, since many of them sort of summarize the life that's being memorialized, I guess. But then there is a sense of sort of like forward motion as well. So how did you decide to put these poems together into a book?
Right. So I wanted to show progression similar to how I wrote my first one, The Love Song of Dominic McDonald, and then how I made Monster like the last one to lead into something else. That is the mindset that I kind of had. So I wanted to show a timeline of growth and maturity. So it starts off kind of talking about the home, and I've lived in several different cities in Los Angeles. So each home is in its own way represented within the book, and then talk about different things that affected my childhood. I wrote a poem addressing my childhood bully. I wrote a poem addressing how I felt being treated like a nerd, and different emotions that came about from just hearing people say different things to me. You know what I'm saying? And then I went into the college years. So I talked about things that were important while I was in school, and learning more about myself and my history, and then getting out of that and going into the workforce and being a part of the real world and seeing what that is worth. So there is a progressive chronological in age type of format that I have.
Awesome. So my last question before the question that we always ask our authors, is to talk a little bit about your relationship with writing and social justice. So we've talked a little bit about it already, but many of these poems focus on racism and stereotyping and class struggle and other barriers to the self-determination that we've spoken about. So what relationship do you see between your art, your creative practice, and social justice? And what does that look like for you in your daily life or in the communities that you're a part of?
Right. So my writing is the voice. It's the expression of a marginalized voice, even in a marginalized community and population, right? So it's kind of showing that there is even still division amongst the divided, um, based off of, you know, intelligence, the polarities of conservative and liberal. You know what I'm saying? So I really just, like we said earlier, just put that out there and make that a part of the conversation, so it creates an awareness, because at the end of the day, people are going to act on things based off of their core values, right? And we can only do one of two things: we can influence or manipulate. I'm someone who strives to influence change. I have a poem in my book called Change that just talks about inspiring people so that they can create the change within themselves. Because all work that is done externally happens internally.
I love that. Um, so we ask all of our authors, corner authors, to tell us a little bit about their publication process. And you did mention that you won the opportunity to create the book in the DC Poetry Project, which is hosted through Day 8. So what was it like working with them and bringing this book into the world?
Right. So Day 8 is a small press based out of DC, grant funded through DC Arts and Humanities and other efforts. And it was really interesting because I never saw myself being published through a publisher. It was just kind of this scary thing, and I've heard people trying to get things published, and it's been like a lot of rejection and stuff like that. And as a Black man talking about social injustice and racism, I didn't think anybody was really going to publish it. To be honest, I really didn't. I was just like, yeah, no one's gonna put their money behind this because of, it feel like it might have been a risk or something like that. Um, so I was happy that the company is interested in Black voices and voices of the community of Ward 8 and 7 in DC. And it's also kind of been something new for them because for the past couple of times we've been in the pandemic, so a lot of things have been virtual. So this is kind of like the first time where someone is going to different places and having different readings, and kind of returning back to being outside. I also got to work with, in a sense, like a booking agent. She was interning. I think they're no longer there, but they sent me the dates and they said, "Are you available on this date, that date?" So they scheduled the whole tour. So I thought it was cool. Like this was, I was like someone is doing the work for me, because I'm very, like, I'm a starter, very self-sufficient. So it was like really a lot of weight off of my shoulders, and being in a position to where all I had to do was say yes, no, I can do this, I can't do this. I thought that was great, So it was easy to work with. The only small thing is like getting books in mass, because it is a small press. Sometimes those things have a little bit of delays, and then getting in stores, you kind of have to make your own consignment deals and things like that. So there's still things I'm learning as far as that business side of it. But as far as like getting readings and putting myself out there, meeting other writers, doing a lot of these literary life type of practices, like that was a beautiful part of the experience for me.
That's really great to hear. Yeah, and it was so wonderful to have you on our panel about work-life balance and having a real life while also being a writer at
Yeah.
East City Bookshop earlier this week. And we did film that, so shameless plug to after you watch this video to go watch that video once it's up on our channel. But yeah, thank you so much for your involvement in the Authors Corner program. And do you have any plugs, anything that you want to let the audience know about? Obviously, this is evergreen, so if there's anything that's time sensitive, we can maybe give a date. But other than that, yeah, where can our viewers find you and what do you have in the works?
Yes, so definitely look me up on Facebook, Dominic McDonald. I post everything that I'm doing there. I'm open to readings, I'm open to workshops, conversations. So, I am the CEO of Nerd Report Productions. So I'm my own secretary, accountant, booking agent, all of that. So uh definitely open to having conversations of anything that you might find interesting, and definitely please support by getting the book. This is a stream of income, but this is also my way to build generational wealth, to inspire young people from Los Angeles, in any race. It really doesn't matter, but inspire them that you can come from the inner city. You can be educated, you can be a nerd, and do something that is really impactful and going to give back, and really just increase your life experience, right? Because sometimes we have this hero complex and we have to save everyone, but also sometimes we have to experience life too. And I never would have had the chance to even be bold enough to move to the other side of the country if I wasn't inspired by someone that said, you can do this too, you can see these new things and try these new things. And now that makes me more of that makes me more fulfilled, right? And now I have stories to spread to different people that I talk to, colleagues, peers, my future children, and it just makes the quality of life that much better when you do that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. It's been great to chat with you about your
Yes,
book.
thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. Thanks for joining us in the Author's Corner. For more conversations with DC area authors and to stay updated about the latest from small independent presses, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook at The Inner Loop DC and on Twitter and Instagram at The Inner Loop Lit.